The footsteps had not stopped. Vexera pressed both palms flat against the monitoring console, her translucent membranes pulling tight across her knuckles as the display cycled through its 24th hour of active pursuit data. Every species in the simulation had collapsed, withdrawn, or triggered emergency shutdown protocols. Every species except one. On screen 47, the human silhouette moved through a generated canyon at the same measured pace it had held since hour 1, and the tracker's heart rate read 62 beats per minute. If that moment unsettles you the way it unsettled Vexera, come back tomorrow. We have more where this came from. The acrid smell of overheated coolant gel. That was what Vexera would remember most clearly about the morning before, 12 hours earlier, when a maintenance technician had spilled half a canister across the simulation floor and the biggest problem in the lab had been paperwork. The test parameters had been straightforward. Galactic Chase Simulation 7-7, a standard endurance battery designed to measure pursuit ceilings across 43 species. Torvex had drawn up the protocol himself, calibrating terrain difficulty, oxygen gradients, and ambient temperature for each participant's homeworld tolerances. The Lyriti lead hunter had done this 9 times before. He was meticulous. He was confident. 12 hours, Torvex had told Vexera that morning, his slit pupils narrowing as he reviewed Kara Lynn's intake file. Field tracker, wiry frame, moderate aerobic indicators. She'll flag around hour 4, maybe 5. Vexera had logged the prediction without comment. Her job was data, not disagreement. She initialized her membrane hydration cycle, sealed her monitoring station, and opened a fresh analytics window. Subject 27, human, female 28 standard cycles. Specialty noted as ultramarathon, desert environment. The phrase meant nothing to Vexera at the time. Kara Lynn entered the simulation chamber carrying a metal water flask. Dented, scratched along the base. She set it on the intake bench while the neural link array calibrated around her temples, took one slow sip, and said nothing to anyone. When the virtual environment loaded and the pursuit clock started, she picked up the flask, tucked it against her hip, and began to run. Not fast. Vexera had watched Torvex's initial confusion. The Lyriti hunting instinct favored explosive acceleration. Their muscle fibers were built for devastating sprints that burned through oxygen reserves in minutes. Torvex's own simulation time had peaked at 42 minutes before his legs locked and his respiratory membranes needed emergency rehydration. Most species in the battery followed similar arcs. Burst, sustain, collapse. The data curves were predictable, almost elegant in their symmetry. Kara's curve did not behave. At hour 1, she was behind every other participant in raw distance. At hour 2, she was still behind. But by hour 3, Vexera noticed something in the overlay data that made her stylus pause against the input screen. The human's core temperature had risen by 1.4 degrees, then stabilized. Perspiration volume had increased dramatically, thin sheets of moisture rolling across her skin in visible waves, and the simulation's thermal sensors registered a continuous heat dump cycle unlike anything in the existing database. Kara was not slowing down because she was not overheating. Her body was shedding excess energy through millions of pores, converting metabolic heat into evaporative loss at a rate that Vexera initially assumed was a sensor malfunction. She wasn't malfunctioning. She was cooling. At hour 4, the first 3 species dropped out. At hour 5, 11 more. By hour 6, Torvex himself sat rigid at his monitoring station, his translucent blue skin flushed pale, watching his own projected simulation ghost collapse in the canyon while the human's icon moved steadily past it. He pulled up the fatigue toxin analysis, and Vexera saw his slit pupils dilate. Lactic acid levels in the human's bloodstream were rising, peaking, then falling. Rising, peaking, falling. A rhythm, a cycle. Her muscles were processing their own waste products and recycling them into usable energy. Torvex turned to Vexera. Her oxygen efficiency ratio is climbing. I see it. That shouldn't happen after 6 hours of continuous exertion. Vexera said nothing. Her membranes were already drier than they should have been. By hour 9, the simulation's automated safety protocols began flagging anomalies. Not for the human, for the environment. The virtual terrain generator was never designed to render continuous pursuit across 3 separate biome cycles. Its texture memory started buffering, stitching canyon walls a half-second too late, leaving momentary seams of black grid visible beneath the sandstone. Kara ran through them without breaking stride. She didn't notice or she didn't care. Torvex had stopped speaking by hour 10. He sat at his station with his arms folded across his chest, slit pupils locked on the pursuit map, and watched the human's icon trace a long, patient spiral through generated desert terrain that the system was now recycling from its opening hours. Vexera checked his vitals on a secondary readout. His respiratory rate was elevated. His membrane hydration had dropped to 60%. He was afraid of a woman on a screen. A low hum from the alert system. Hour 12. The original test endpoint. Kara's biosignals showed no deviation from her hour 6 baseline. Vexera pulled the full thermoregulation report and felt her membranes contract involuntarily as the numbers resolved. Torvex. Her voice came out dry. Her sweat gland density is between 2 and 4 million units across total skin area. The evaporative cooling efficiency is reading at 99% sustained output. Torvex did not look away from the screen. What about fatigue toxins? Lactic acid is being recycled through active muscle tissue in real time. She's converting her own waste chemistry back into fuel. Vexera paused. The next sentence felt heavy. Her species developed this system to chase prey across open ground for distances exceeding 40 kilometers. They don't need to be faster. They just never stop. Torvex's jaw tightened. Shut down the simulation. The protocols require. Override them. Vexera entered the override codes. Nothing happened. The system had locked into extended run mode at hour 8 and now demanded a full cooldown cycle before manual termination. Estimated wait, 12 additional hours. Which meant the human would keep running. How do you classify something the simulation itself cannot outlast? And now, 24 hours deep, the console screen still pulsing with that same steady heartbeat rhythm, Vexera understood what she was watching. Not an athlete performing beyond expectations. Not an anomaly in the data. She was watching a predator doing exactly what its body was designed to do, patiently, efficiently, without urgency, because urgency was unnecessary when you could simply never stop. The simulation had been built to find ceilings. Carolyn did not appear to have one. Torvex sat motionless beside her, his translucent skin nearly white, and neither of them could look away from the pursuit map where that single icon kept moving, kept turning, kept tracing its spiral like something that had been doing this since before their species learned to stand. Kara's voice crackled through the simulation audio feed. Casual. Unhurried. I'm just getting warmed up. Vexera's stylus slipped from her fingers and clattered against the console. Beside her, Torvex flinched at the sound. The system finally released its cooldown lock at hour 26. Vexera initiated shutdown and the virtual canyon dissolved into static, then blackness, then the flat default grid of an empty simulation chamber. Carolyn stood at the center of it, stretching her shoulders, rolling her neck. She glanced up at the observation window. You guys quit already? I do this for fun on weekends. On the intake bench where she had left it that morning, the water flask sat empty, dented, scratched along the base. It had held maybe a liter, enough for a casual sip before a 12-hour test that became a 26-hour marathon that became the reason Vexera filed a reclassification request she never thought she'd write. Apex Pursuer, no known ceiling. The flask caught the overhead light, small and ordinary and insufficient for what it had just sustained. On the wall screen behind it, the last frozen frame of the simulation still glowed. An endless horizon, a single set of footprints, and no sign of stopping. The footsteps had finally stopped. Somehow, the silence was worse. She hasn't run a pursuit simulation since. Stories like Kara's are why we do this. If you want more biology that rewrites what you thought you knew, subscribe and stay with us. Tomorrow's story might be the one that keeps you up at night.